Actually, I need to put this on. We all mic'd up? Okay, can you all hear us? Excellent. So welcome to this discussion on celebrating you. We're going to have narratives on resilience and success. So I want this panel to be real stories behind leadership. Remember those times that tested us, right? Where you may have learned to do something differently, and some of the lessons learned from that experience that may help change people that follow after you. So in the next 30 minutes, we'll do 30 minutes with the panel, and then we'll leave some time for Q&A. And go back to I'd just like you to think about that question I posed earlier. What help or support would have really helped you change the trajectory in your career had you had that earlier? And we'll come back to that. So I'm going to ask the panel, my esteemed panelists, to just introduce themselves, name and role, and maybe to kickstart it with one sentence on what resilience means to you now. So Rehana.
My name is Rehana Farrel. I'm the CEO of 100 Women in Finance, which is a global networking association. And for me, resilience really means getting in touch with your own personal values and developing your own reflective practice of figuring out, are you living those values? And that includes things like setting boundaries and making sure you're taking care of yourself, because no one else is going to do that for you. You really have to prioritize your own well-being in order to be resilient.
Moon.
Hi, I'm Moon Kim. I'm Executive Vice President and a Corporate Affairs Practice Leader at Booth. We're a large agency. We're actually quite close by, just a 7-minute walk. I timed it. We're a marketing, communication, creative agency. And a humble brag, because I do have my colleagues here, but we're really well known in the consumer space, and we're always honored. But recently, we were recognized as one of the top 100 corporate agencies in the world. That's kudos to my team here too. So resilience to me means really the quiet decisions that you're making when no one else is around, and that might mean showing up when you really didn't want to, you were dreading it. It might mean having that conversation when you were really scared. It might mean actually not giving up on something or someone, including yourself. It's also carrying your history proudly, not being buried by it, and not really using the hardest chapters of your life, not as your identity, but really as evidence that you can carry on, that you will go on, and I am going on.
It's lovely. Musi?
Hi everyone, Musi, Qureshi. I'm a partner here at PwC actually, focused largely on the financial services banking sector. So a lot of clients and friends and partners here with us. So thank you all for coming. And again, on behalf of PwC, we're so honored to have you all. It's lovely to look out on a room like this. I don't know when you showed that picture of the panel, it wasn't a panel, it was your executive team. I felt like I've been in many of those kinds of situations, whether it's around a table, a boardroom, or a panel discussion. So thank you for sharing that, Mike. Resilience to me, when you asked the question, Nita, I had to say a little bit of what you said, but to me it's getting up every day. Not in a way that's sort of burying your truth and your values or your strengths, but finding that silver lining. And I know sometimes people will say to me, oh, you're so positive all the time. I'm not positive all the time, but it's when you fall and being able to get back up and finding a reason to do that, whether it's for yourself, whether it's for your children, the generations that follow. So to me, it's the ability to get up, it's the willingness to get up, and it's doing it every single day and charging forward.
I love what you said, because when I think about resilience, I sort of think if you evolve as a person, when people say, what's your brand? You think of how resilient you are. There's a level of evolution and adaptation that you go through every day as you're going through your career. So, I'm going to stick to the topic. People who know me will know that I sort of talk a lot about resilience in many different forms. I'm going to stay with this topic and ask you, maybe start with Rehana. Think back to a time that may have tested you professionally, whether it was things that we all experience, a reorg, maybe a layoff, something that maybe taken a confidence hit or public mistake. What can you talk to us about what happened and how you navigated through that?
Absolutely, and I'll start with a big one, which is getting fired. When you're reorged out of a job, that's a big setback. There's really no other way to interpret that other than it being bad at first. And then when you really stop and think about it, there actually is a silver lining. So in my case, I was 41, I had 2 kids, 7 and almost 5. I was the sole breadwinner in my family. I was working at Merrill Lynch. I'd been an MD for about 5 years. And you don't really ever know why you're the person who's chosen. There are a lot of theories. It's actually really fun to be fired, strangely, because people come out of the woodwork and say the nicest things to you. It's like being eulogized while you're alive.
They never said that to you while you were working with them.
Literally. I'm like, people I didn't know, I would get these emails from people that are like, I've always looked up to you and you've been such a role model. And I was like, oh, that's so nice. I have no
They're
idea
looking
who
for their
this is.
next job.
And so, no, but so it is all about, like, let's be honest, I was really pissed off for about 2 days. And then I was like, wait a second, I actually am not that happy post being dead bank walking and being bought by B of A. The culture really changed. We were a very talent-led culture where you would end up with the Rehana Farrel job. And those were the unique set of things that you were really good at and that they would continue to stretch you. And at Bank of America with 300,000 people, that doesn't really work. You just have very distinct jobs and you do that job and you play that playbook. So it's great if you're starting your career or if you want to move around, you know, because you can pick up and move to a different job because there's a playbook and you just follow the playbook. Whereas Merrill, it was like sort of make your own adventure. So a really different style. And so I ended up doing a very extensive and intensive job search in 14 weeks and found 5 places, all of which I think I would have been happy in or happier in, and ended up choosing a really small platform at Guggenheim Partners, which was like 2,000 people. And when I turned up every day, I could see the impact of doing that. So it was just so much more true to my operating model and the environment in which I thrived. So it really was about interpreting that event as something that I could learn from, that I could grow from, I could benefit from. I would actually be happier, and I was happier in a new environment than I had been. And when you're, let's be honest, like you have 2 young kids at home, you're just trying to not rock the boat. You're just trying to get through every day, especially when they're really little. It's like, did I get to work without any sort of like baby anything on me? You know, and so when you're sort of coming out of those years, you're not necessarily as, I would say, focused on, am I getting everything out of this platform and this role every day? So it was a really good wake-up call. So I really think that interpreting setbacks as an opportunity to learn and grow is really important.
And I love that you said that because every cloud has a silver lining. But I think that's something that you said that really, I do want to just ask you a follow-up on, that you were upset for 2 days. Now, a lot of people I know having sort of, I think my role was restructured at one point. It takes a long time to get over. So what really helped you sort of regain some of your momentum? So it's fascinating to hear that sort of drive, but maybe, you know,
What I say to my girlfriends, another friend of mine is in the publishing business, and she was reorged out of her role. And I said, I'm not the person to call when you want to process that. When you're ready to get in the game and you want to like get your CV out, talk network, talk strategy, I'm your gal, put me in. And so just understanding who you are and how you show up for your friends, I think is really important. But it was also just my own orientation. I was like, well, that's unfortunate. Actually, I'm really pissed for the following 5 reasons. Maybe I went to a kickboxing class and I got some aggression out. But then it was like, okay, well, these are the set of facts and circumstances with which I am presented. What am I going to do about them? That's the only thing that you can really control is your reaction. So many years later, I got into meditation and some Buddhist thinking. And there's one really great quote of like a Buddhist monk, and somebody sort of runs into, I'll say, the monastery and says, you know, I'm going to kill you. And he says, no, I'm going to let you kill me. And I was like, now that's really like quite a power shift. Yeah. So it's like, well, I can't do anything about the fact that I was fired, right? I can only control what my reaction is to that set of circumstances.
And I think that's an important point, and I'm sure others got to share that. It's important to realise the things that are really within your control and the things that are outside your control. I often tell that to people. Don't stress about the things outside your control. Just sort of manage your own boundary.
Yeah.
Right? That's really telling.
It is fascinating because we often talk at PwC about controlling the controllables. It's almost like a little saying that we have. So I love that you said that. I was going to share that the ability to say 2 days, that's what I'm going to do, and now I'm going to plan and process. I'm very much like that, so I hear that and I can sort of immediately put myself in your shoes. I came back from maternity leave and had a moment of similar sort of, I have no book of business, I have no client, I have no project to go to, And at the risk of embarrassing Pushan, I'm going to say I looked around and said, there are lots of things I don't have, but wallowing in that's not going to help. What are the things I do have? I have friends, I have colleagues who look at, and I went and I spoke with Pushan, who said, actually, I do have a project, and I think might have saved my career in the firm, because he said, I've got a project, you can start on that. It's across the street, which as a consultant, for those who know, we're often on flights. I had a 4.5-month baby at home. I wasn't quite ready to do that. And on top of that, I had been selected for jury duty and then selected for the jury. So I was on jury duty for a month while, like, the first month I came back from maternity leave. And if it had not been for the kindness of a friend and colleague who said, you know what, I'm going to help you out in this moment, I think I wouldn't have been as resilient. But I think it was figuring out what I control, what I should wallow in, where I shouldn't, and then figuring out what the next 3 steps are for me. But it also, later on, I know we're going to talk about sort of what makes you successful and how we all got here. Let's not underestimate the friends of our girlfriend, the power of our girlfriends and our colleagues and friends.
Right, and I'm going to stay with you for a minute because, I'm going to flip to, some of the invisible rules, right? So as you sort of got into more senior rooms, what are some of the things you wish that somebody had told you, right? Those unspoken things. I wish I said that. I wish somebody had told me that maybe you should start networking and not burn the midnight oil, every day until you're like 40, right?
And I think it's funny you pick up that one. I think many of us feel that if we just work hard and put our head down, we will be successful. And I think the networking, that was absolutely an important one that nobody had really said to me. But I think there are even things like asking for feedback. That's just not something I was taught, trained, ever shared. Like, ask for the feedback, ask for the difficult feedback. It's very easy to get you're doing great, keep doing what you're doing. That's not helpful. So I think that's one that I learned very late, to ask and insist on getting constructive feedback. I think that helps, and that's something that was I don't know if it's an unspoken rule so much as an unspoken thing that I figured out, and that helped me so much, because then I could figure out what else to do. I think there are things like, what's happening in the room that I'm not in? Asking those questions. So I think a lot of the unspoken things are things that I've learned to ask, where before I would just be heads down and working.
And I think, many of us are Asians in this room, right? Part of our culture is heads down. Do your work. You'll be, compensated, or the benefits will pay you. And then you realize you get to a certain level that actually that only gets you to a certain level, right? What else? Then you find some of your maybe other counterparts, non-Asian counterparts, that there's this recipe, come out of school, they're sort of very confident, they're networking from day one. And there's sort of things that I think are important lessons as we reflect and we talk to our children and other generations. So you see the power of feedback. Feedback's a gift, the power of networking. There was always some resistance to network, receiving constructive, I call it constructive feedback. So I love that you sort of brought that up.
For me, I wish I learned earlier is embracing and then reframing office politics. Obviously the word is generally negative, right? You think, oh my God, it's draining. I want to stay above from it. I want to not be involved in it. And for many years I did. I was the outsider. I didn't want to embrace it. But if you reframe it to understanding the system in the organization so that you can effectively move and have greater impact, which is what I call organizational fluency.
Yep.
You want to be fluent in the organization. And if you sort of reframe it as, so I can do bigger things, I can make a greater impact, my team can make greater impact, it actually becomes something not draining, but empowering. So I think when I now talk to my client leaders, and I have a lot of one-on-ones with them too, to help them sort of navigate their large, highly matrixed organization, and I tell them, don't be a bystander, get in there, embrace, and learn the organization system, be fluent in them, know who are the real decision maker, who are the influencers of those decision makers. I mean, I've been sort of lucky that I've been at my company for 17 years. So in some ways, even though I said I don't want to be involved in office politics, I started to know, because we're only a 300+ organization, you start to know, okay, how are decisions made? Is this person a hallway person or a Slack person? Or do I need to have FaceTime with this person, or is an email okay? And so you just naturally pick that up, but I do have a lot of empathy for people, and my twin sister has moved every two years. She's in a new job, and she's just like overwhelmed by just learning not just her job, but at a certain level, you have to know how decisions are made. And so I have a lot of empathy, because it is not easy work, but it is work that I think is meaningful, and don't avoid it, embrace it.
And how did you adjust your approach then, without sort of losing your authenticity?
Yeah, because you're right in that when you think about someone who's like, really knows how to work the system, you're like, oh, politician. You don't want to be that, right? You want to stay authentic. But I think the reframing of it helped me, because I'm like, I want to do great work, right? A lot of people want to do meaningful work, make impact. So if you just sort of use that as like, that is where I want to go, the destination. It's not to cozy up to people. It's not to schmooze. You have to maybe sometimes do that, so then you can actually get their involvement, get their contribution. So if I think about sort of the impact of it all, I think I can stomach it better.
I think that's a really important point, because you're elevating it to a values level. So I have an agenda. I'd like to, get something done. So how is this person that I'm talking to, how do they think about it? What's their perspective? So it's like an exercise in perspective taking to say, if they are for this, why are they for it? If they're against it, why are they against it? They may have very valid reasons that you just hadn't considered.
Right.
So if you sort of elevate it to, I'm trying to build a coalition, to get something done, I think that really helps. And going back to what you're saying about feedback, I also have seen people ask for feedback in a way that shuts down feedback. And people will say, well, how was that? Well, what's the answer when I say that? Good, fine. When you ask, how can I be more effective? How could that have been improved? Right? Like, you can signal how open you are to feedback by how you ask for that question.
That's a great point, right? Because I think most of my learnings have come through just very constructive and timely. Don't wait for those 3-month, 6-month reviews. They're sort of going on. After you've had a meeting, reach out for feedback. I think as we just started this session, Mega, I'm going to call you out. I know I'm going to call you out. I think you said you did some stand-up comedy. I was like, okay, I want some feedback from you after this session, right? Is there anything I want to do better, right? We take those opportunities, right? Make it current, make it real time. I think that's really important. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to talk about this topic of sponsorship, advocacy and self-advocacy. Let me get my words out. Self-advocacy. Can you share an example of when sponsorship, or really lack thereof, materially changed your trajectory? And this goes to what I was talking about earlier. How did you find advocates or become your own sponsor when you didn't have one? So maybe Musi, do you want to sort of take that? I see you.
Sure, I'm nodding along. I'll rewind a few years to when I was aspiring to be a partner at PwC. It's a challenging process, it's a long process, and candidly, there weren't many people that looked like me before I made partner here. Not that there are none, but few and far between. There were many folks who I didn't necessarily see myself emulating. And in an attempt to help me, I was often paired with other women who maybe weren't like me at all, but we had the same gender in common. Or they also, person X has a child, therefore you should go talk to them. And it just always felt very forced. Until I found a sponsor who happened to be a middle-aged white man from New Hampshire. Like, we have almost, and he likes extreme sports like heli skiing. I don't even like the cold. So we have nothing in common. But he turned out to be my #1 sponsor advocate, and talking about the rooms where I was not in and sharing the feedback that I, at the time, didn't even know to ask for. But it's finding the person that is going to be the best sponsor for me, regardless of gender, regardless of sort of the obvious demographics, I think that was really critical. Things like, and I know this, I tell the story and sometimes people cringe, but I'm okay, so nobody be too upset. He came out of a partner meeting and said, "You're on the list, and I was sent to ask if you would consider taking that out." The nose ring. And there was this awkward moment where you could tell he was so uncomfortable asking me because he didn't want to ask the question. I was so uncomfortable because I didn't expect it and I didn't know, do I have to answer this right now? Is this like a requirement to become a partner? And he said, think about it. But it was the awareness, like I had no idea that would even be a topic of conversation. I wasn't in the room. He could have easily just never said that to me. In the end, I didn't take out the nose ring. I made partner. It's all good. And we had this conversation very openly. He continues to be a great friend and sponsor. And I said to him, I'm not comfortable taking it out. He said, great. I just felt like you should know that that was a topic. It's not going to prevent you, but you should know that that was a topic of discussion. And here's what I would suggest, blah, blah. We've moved past that. But that kind of sponsorship from a true ally, I think, is invaluable.
So two things I'm thinking of as you said that. One, how did you forge that connection? Because something you said, sports. Now, how many times have we all heard, right, men talk about sports? I certainly don't follow NFL, I'll be honest, or basketball, right? Maybe now, I haven't been here 25 years. But how did you make that connection with your sponsor? And did you specifically ask for anything?
You know, at the time I didn't ask for anything. Interestingly, how I forged the connection was through good hard work. So this was probably 15 years ago. I didn't know the value of networking. So a little bit, in that case, I think I was using the things that we overall taught. Head down, do good work. He recognized it in me. I don't think we, in 2026, can rely on that. And so maybe my takeaway from this is to turn around and help those behind me, those who are coming, to say they shouldn't have to ask. I should be reaching out and helping folks that are, following in our footsteps. I just didn't know at the time to ask.
For me, actually, I had a sponsor. He and I were he was almost like a father figure. Also had a toxic relationship too, but he also fought my battles for me. So I never had to ask. I just had to pitch him the idea, and then he was a bulldog, and he got me what I wanted, whether it was just a comment, whether it was the raise that I wanted. But then he left because he was also an alcoholic. So he left the organization, and there goes my sponsor, right? But there also became an opportunity because I was his number two to potentially step into it. But that was when I really needed my sponsor the most, right? Someone to advocate for yourself. So for a while, I thought like, okay, my work will speak for itself. Head down, just get the work, get the results, get the outcomes, and someone will notice. I mean, people might have noticed, but no one did anything about it. Mm-hmm. And then I started to just feel mad. I started to feel resentful. And I was a pretty optimistic person. I started to be really pessimistic. I started to bring my work home, right, and start to spill. And I would complain to my husband. My husband was later like, oh my God, you're a broken record. Because for 9 months, I was a broken record. I would complain about the same thing. It was just the details might have been different. And it was starting to cost me more by not asking, maybe affecting my health. Just my mood was bad too. And I just started to not be happy in any capacity. And so I decided, you know what, I'm going to ask. I just got to do it just for me. So, of course, I prepared your receipts, right, your documentation, you practiced your pitch, and I went up to my CEO and asked for a lunch and I told her why I wanted to meet her. I want to talk about the next level. And she was sort of dreading that because she knew, that I was going to make the ask, but I also knew because she was dreading it that I probably knew what the answer was at the time, but I still wanted to have that conversation. And she gave me her undivided attention. We had a lunch over 2 hours. I made my case. As soon as I made that case, though, just the tension released from my shoulders. Literally, it was like, I could just breathe just more deeply. And I just knew in that instant, it wasn't about the outcome that mattered. Of course, it was the nice cherry on top. And I did not get it at that lunch. She told me no, and I had to be curious why. but I got it 6 months later. But in that moment, for me, I just taught me that like self-advocacy is not just a career strategy, it's a form of self-respect. That's why it was weighing me down so much, because I wasn't had the goals to do it for myself. And so finally when I did that, I was just like, I don't care what happens, like I just surrendered to it. And then that's when 6 months later, I was just surprised that, I thought it was going to take longer, but here I am. So
I think I love what you said, you've got to sort of respect yourself first, especially when you're going through a hard time, and then bring out the positivity, and then it's easier for people or have the perception of respect from others, right?
Yeah.
I think that's important. It's hard when you've got had a confidence here. So I'm going to stay with you for a minute. Let's just talk about sort of navigating some of these biases, right? Again, I think as women and as Asians, we sometimes get stereotyped. Too quiet, you don't speak up, or you're too ambitious, or even worse, because you're too direct, you're too aggressive. Heavenly, I don't know. So what's a moment where you may have faced that dynamic, and maybe a strategy that you use to navigate that? Question, maybe I'll stay with you for a minute.
So I'm definitely going to answer your question, but it's going to be in a roundabout way, because I thought about this we live in an era, I think this is something that everyone can relate to, that your personal brand is always being defined, right? And the question is whether you're the author or letting someone else define it for you with the labels, right? And I, chose a career where I prop up other brands, I prop up other leaders, and I told myself that's what I love doing. I love helping someone else define their brand and then helping to amplify that. And people would tell me, like, you're great at it. You're great as my behind-the-scenes person. And so I started to actually believe that and label myself. I'm a great behind-the-scenes person. I'm not the one here. I'm helping the person up here, right? Making sure they feel comfortable. And so you start to sort of like say that that's what you are. That's what your swim lane is. And that's when labels can be dangerous, right? Because it limits the possibilities that you see in yourself, right? And so it wasn't until, my husband actually is the one that really pushed me to do my own personal work. And I used to be like, I'm fine. I don't need to read that book. I don't need to do the self-help stuff. I'm not, I thought, like, I'm not broken enough to do that. And I think it's because in the Asian culture, like, we are told to just, like, be silent in suffering, right? We don't need, we don't talk about our pain. We just show up and smile. We call that resilience. But it started to come to a breaking point, and I'm really grateful that my husband pushed me and actually gave me an ultimatum. That he said, like, and there's my husband right now, and he said to me that if you want this marriage to work, you have to do your personal work. And so I am so glad he did that, because 7 years therapy, other personal work that I've been doing, that has really helped me face my past, things that I thought, like, and also raising a daughter too, like, you start to relive your childhood, things that I might have suppressed are bubbling up, and I sort of, was ready to really tackle that work, that real part of that work, a meaningful part of that work. And I think it's no coincidence that 7 years into that work, I can be here instead of just propping up another leader. I can be more active on LinkedIn. I can be more I'm not shy and cringing when I hear my voice, right? So because I'm more comfortable in my own skin. I think that's really what I want to be, that role model for other people, especially my daughter and my son, to be like, the work that you do, to just be comfortable with yourself. And then you can, I think, soar. You can go into different rooms where you're uncomfortable, and the discomfort is never the obstacle. It's a sign of growth, right? When you're uncomfortable. So.
And it's interesting that you say that, because when you think about confidence, it's something that we talked about earlier. How many times has you feel like your credibility has been diminished by just somewhere somebody may have said, oh, I wouldn't ask her. It's just, these things have reverberations, right, on confidence. So I think it's really important. That was a common theme that came out in one of our focus sessions when we were talking about this program, this initiative. The underlying was really helping people build their self-confidence, because it's very easy to diminish that with a comment overnight, right? So I don't know if there was a strategy that you had, right, to change and sort of.
Yeah, it was really to, because I'm such a people pleaser and growing up as an immigrant in Oklahoma, you just start to just read the room, and that might have helped me be successful in some part. I just felt empty. I felt like I had so many masks on. I was always performing, and it wasn't until like really unpacking my own personal history and actually looking inward. And that was like just sitting still with yourself, being with your feelings versus distracting yourself and cleaning the house. And I did do that. I have a really tidy home because sometimes when I'm anxious, I'm cleaning, and just sitting there and observing and not looking for answers from the outside because you have the answers here and trusting yourself. So I just encourage everyone to do that work of listening to yourself. Maybe some people are more advanced, and I applaud you. But I did not listen to myself, and I'm also an identical twin. So we were always like, "What do you think? What do you think?" I just always either looked at my twin or looked to the outside world for that approval and validation. Yeah. And now I'm starting to actually check in with myself. It's still a work in progress. There are times when I still like to my husband, "What do you think?" And I want his approval. And I still want my mom's approval. But I'm learning that my approval matters too.
I see, Rehana, you're nodding quite a lot. Thoughts?
And just goes back to what we were talking about at the start about resilience. It really is about being in touch with yourself and your own values and how you want to spend your time and your own boundaries and just figuring that out for yourself. So I often will do panel talks like this, and I did one up at my alma mater at Smith, who was telling us that she was a women's college graduate. And so there was this one young woman who asked the panel this earnest question, and I could tell she was looking for an answer, and I was like, no, you have the answer. We can't answer it. We can tell you how each of us would handle a given situation, but there's no one monolithic way. There's no one right way. You have to choose what's right for you in every situation, and it's so relational. Like, you will really invest in your relationship with your family, right? Your relationship with PwC might be really helpful to your success. But then there are other relationships, like somebody who's a jerk on the subway, that you're just not going to spend that much time and energy. They're just not worth it. So, like, just even calibrating for your own self of just deciding, again, how am I going to let that impact me? To your point about these comments that people make that can really diminish someone's credibility and sense of self and their confidence.
Yeah. So as we move on towards the end of the panel, I do want to ask you all individually about some of your career moves. I mean, you're now in sort of very different roles and different. I know, Rehana, you moved from for-profit to now non-for-profit. Talk about, I'd love to hear, I'm sure the audience would love to hear about one of the most consequential career moves that you had, whether it was a sidestep, a step back, or just talk to us and how you navigated through it.
I would say for me, the biggest is having moved from the for-profit sector to the nonprofit sector 10 years ago. And the way that I thought about it was seeking information. So there were a lot of people in my network with whom I spoke, either in industry at the time, in the for-profit industry, or in the recruiting space, who said, this is something that you can try your hand at, and you can do it for 2 years, and it's like a sabbatical, and you can come back. So it felt like a riskless trade because I could explore and I wouldn't necessarily be taking myself off track in any way. And so for me, it's having, I would say, like a board of directors, that sort of kitchen table that you can rely on when you're trying to make big decisions, is just a really important way so that you don't feel like you're in it alone and you have people that you can trust and whose opinions you value and who've been there with you, like you were saying, your mentor and your sponsor for all of those years. Like, those are the people who know you best, know your aptitude, your capabilities, what you've said that you wanted, and can help you just think through those big life decisions.
Yeah, my most consequential career move was actually staying in the company that I'm in when things seemed to be falling apart, and everybody else was leaving. Like, my team was like, literally, there was kind of a mass exodus, and I was like, every time someone was like, "Moon, I gotta talk to you," I was like, "Oh my God, who's leaving now?" And it was one of those situations. I was like, and my boss also left. And it was actually a period where it was great instability. One of the biggest client in our agency and our team was actually retrench mode, and that's kind of scary, right? When their budget was this, and now all of a sudden it's this, and you're like, oh my gosh. And it happened sort of overnight. And I also was like, I need to refresh my resume, I need to leave. But something in me, that voice told me, you can't leave. you won't forgive yourself. If you leave when the ship is, rocky and unsteady, you can't leave. You have to still show up here. And so I felt like this moral responsibility to stay. And then if I wanted to leave, I told myself, I'm going to leave when things are more stable and I can leave, my team in a good place or a decent place, not when things are so rocky and everyone's sort of uncertain here. And that actually was, I'm so glad I stayed, because not because of the outcomes and the growth and all of that happened, but because of the self-belief that I was able to extract. Because we all know there will be more storms, right? And instead of avoiding and running away, staying and seeing it through, I now have that self-belief that, oh gosh, it's snowing.
I was just going to say,
right?
talking of storms.
But I feel like that, I know I can weather another storm. And we've had more storms, my team knows that, right? And just knowing that, like, we've been here before, just in a different, the details might be different, and we can get through it. That's priceless.
Lucy.
I was going to say, I don't know that I have one consequential moment, but actually part of what I think crafts careers is sort of many of these key moments, and each one, some said what you choose in each moment sort of leads you to the next one and the next one. So I think not every one is consequential, but there were a few. When I came to PwC from a smaller startup consulting firm, I'll stay a year and then I'll take my bonus and we'll be on my merry way. I'm not staying at a big firm like this. And so I think the choice to stay, again, like not running away from something that was different, that was a big one. When I left on maternity leave, I was like, I don't know that I need to go back. And sort of, it was great, the time and the space to go, nope, this is what I love doing. I'm going to go back, and making that choice, saying, I would like to be a partner in this firm. What does that mean? And making that choice. So I think at every sort of juncture, each of those has been consequential. And even now, I'd say there are moments where I make a choice and sometimes I know that it's a big deal. Sometimes you don't realize until you look back with 20/20 hindsight. But I think we all have many of those.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that, because as I reflect personally on some of my career moves, I've only stayed within literally less than a handful of organisations, and internally moved quite a few. And a lot of people will ask me, what prompted that? And I always think every time I did a move, I thought, what's the pros and what's the cons? Where are you in your life, and how much change are you willing to take on? How much risk? Because you can move outside your company into another industry, or within your company to another function. Where are you in your life? If you just had a child, have you just got married, or are you going through some other, you've got elderly care? You have to think about the amount of change you're willing to take on as you're looking at these moves. So I always say, do a pros, do a cons, write it down on paper. And I honestly think some of the moves I did, I could not sleep. I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? This is going to be the worst role. And they turned back, going back to your comment on hindsight, they turned out to be the best roles I had for various reasons. So I think it's always important, right? I mean, what may make sense to use your trusted board of advisors, get an outside perspective on some of these changes, because as you may see a change, somebody else may be able to highlight something else to you. So it's really important, but I'm always a risk taker, so I said don't be afraid of change. Just know how much change you're willing to take on, right? And as we close this, before we go into Q&A, I'm going to ask you all with a bit of a surprise question. In one sentence, what do you want the audience to remember the next time they're navigating a hard moment at work or professionally? We'll start with you at the end.
You are not alone. So, reach out, get help, ask questions, ask for support.
Lovely.
Do square breathing. My son taught me that. And just long breaths. You think you're panicking, that's the last thing you want to do. But just in 3 seconds of breathing, square breathing, which is just long breaths, you start to feel a little bit calmer, because you've regulated a little bit of your nervous system, and you're able to sort of see things a little differently.
I would say yes to both of those, and to ask questions and don't assume. So I think oftentimes, and I've been in a fundraising role for 10 years, So you really get into your head. You're like, Nita's not calling me back. She's never going to make another gift. She doesn't even like 100 Women in Finance anymore. It's over, right? And then
I've joined.
And then Nita pops up. She's like, "Hi, I'm just back from London. I've been away from like 6 weeks. I'm so glad to get your email. I'm sorry I missed the last one." You're like, "Okay, phew, she still likes me." You end up telling yourself all of these stories as a fundraiser in particular. We're particularly prone to this. And so I think everybody does that.
Yeah.
So don't assume that you know what's going on. Be intellectually curious, ask questions, and then if it's not a great environment, you can vote with your feet. Right? Like, don't feel like you're trapped anywhere. You have the power to dictate how you show up at work, including leaving a job that doesn't suit you or a manager that doesn't suit you. So don't settle.
That's wonderful. I think that was a really great comment. So with that, I think I'm going to hand it over to you guys for some questions, or maybe even to sort of think about what we started off. Questions in the audience for the panel, please. And please sort of introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Shirley Sharma. I'm the owner of Tomorrow's Genius, which is an online math education website. And I have a question for all of you, anyone who wants to answer. How often and do you use AI agents to summarize and communicate?
Actually, so in our organization, I think we're getting close to like putting that in your KP, like your performance metric of your AI usage. So we have fully embraced it, and even our ITs, our CTO sort of shows the utilization. Like in my team, I would say generally at first or second, and we're in the era of communication, so I definitely encourage my team to use it. I use it. I have to be, obviously that client zero. I have to also use it if I'm telling my team to use it. But I think the best way I've used it is I have an idea what I want to say. AI polishes it, and then I go back and add my voice to it, because when I get like notes and I'm like, and I know that person, I'm like, that was a robot that wrote that. That was not your voice. So I always say to people, you don't want to lose your voice. You want to stay in the loop, right? Human in the loop, right? And so I think that's a big, and then you might want like AI to start it. It doesn't matter. Like I like to start something, but generally I've seen team members say like, I've had AI do the release or to do the speech, and then I heavily edit it. I try to go back and forth with AI. It's funny though, because I wrote a byline with my colleague, and we wrote it ourselves about AI integration. And then we were like curious of like how Gemini, because we have an enterprise subscription with Gemini, and we said, I wonder how Gemini would write this. And I was like, oh, there's parts that I actually like. And I was trying to weave it, and then we asked another colleague to actually read our byline. She's like, I don't like the AI version. I like your human version. And so that was an interesting thing of like just staying in the loop is so important.
Couldn't agree more. I will use it to start something so that I'm not staring at a blank sheet of paper and heavily edit. I will also use it at the end of a process to polish something, like make this not defensive, make this not pointed, make this more authoritative. So to be really focused. And I will never send anything out that is pure AI or that I haven't reviewed. And when I get things that are so heavily AI, I'm like, I don't need to read ChatGPT. Like, do you have a point of view? Because if you don't have a point of view, why are we talking or emailing or meeting? So I don't think that things that, and it's so obvious, like there's such a long dash. And then
so many emojis now.
Right, and I'm like, okay, so you can use AI, great. Like, and so I think it's really important to develop some mastery, but not dependence.
And I think...
No, I do not. And it's much better to subscribe, because otherwise I think you have even less data protection. So I'm also very careful about what data I give it. I don't say, here's my P&L, what expense should I cut? I say, like, here's an email that I would like to be less pointed because I'm in a cranky mood, so take out the crankiness. So like a lot more innocuous than, sort of trade secrets and state secrets.
And we've got a session later on that talks about women and AI, because I think what we see is the adoption of AI. And it was interesting, I think one of the recent summits, I think it may have been the Cisco summit, talked about it's not really human in the loop. it's changing. It's AI in the loop. Right? It's because I think maintaining that level of authenticity is so key, because to the point that we all say, I think AI personally is creating some level of homogeneous population, right? We're all going to come out with the same resumes, the same bios, have the same interior designs, and our houses all look the same. And then you're like, hold on a minute.
Pleasantville.
Yeah,
Yes, exactly.
So that, please don't lose that authenticity. I mean, AI is a super enabler, but know where you still need to put your fingerprint on your work. Right, that's so important. So yeah, I think we're going to have a session this afternoon, especially targeted towards like women and AI. So thank you for the question. Great question. Please. Got another question in the front? Two.
Thank you for all your fun and great insights. So just wanted to double click on a comment Moon made, but it's really for everybody, on office fluency. I really love that because I've never worked at a company less than 100,000 employees. And so you think about office politics, it's always negative. I was never good at it, even at senior level. Being at a senior level, never liked it, was never good at it. So maybe just, and I'm sure a lot of us in the room work for massive companies, could you just, any of you, like double click on some tactical, strategic, real advice around that? That would be super helpful.
I actually really liked something Rehana said earlier about like reframing it as why, and I can't remember if like why are they doing something and understanding. And so the way I've used that in the context of office politics is often to say, what is that person's motivations, plural, not motivation, because usually there could be many things. There could be a personal level, they want to get promoted, or they just don't like the color palette on your slide deck, or they want that job and blah, 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 right? Like there's many things that people have. Sometimes it's they're having a bad day, and we don't need to read more into it. So I think reframing things in that way of like, what's their motivation, understanding the other person's point of view, and then working with some facts versus like just talking about the politics as people like nitpicking at each other, because usually there's something underlying it, and if you can get to the root of that, you can actually maybe help them, maybe see their point of view, and then you're actually working with some tangible things as opposed to just feelings and he said, she said. So that's something that I've found helpful, is walking a mile in their shoes, or trying to. Not always
In
successful.
addition to perspective taking, I would also say just treating it like a relationship.
Yeah,
And so a
that's
relationship's not going to get better unless you invest time, and unless you have an honest conversation. So if I can really understand your point of view and understand where you're coming from, we may look at the same set of facts and choose to disagree, but at least I've invested the time to understand where you're coming from and like taken the time to share with you where I'm coming from. So again, we don't need to leave every discussion having come to 100% agreement, but just a little bit more of an understanding of differences of opinion and what may drive them and what those trade-offs may be. I think almost everyone can get behind a decision if they feel like they've been heard in the decision and that their perspective was considered. And if you can say, well, the reason we're going to open the New York office and not the LA office is because they might not like that because they want the job in LA, they want to live near the beach, but at least you can say, like, we did take your perspective into consideration, and this is the reason that this other overarching concern is what's being prioritized, so that they can understand it.
And for me, I think going into the office, obviously it's easier to embrace the fluency of an organization. I think Zoom is a lot harder to do, but it can be done if you are very intentional about it. But I always think about like the conversations I run into people in the restrooms, ladies' room, or getting the water, and then like I just talk and something personal or something innocuous like weather, and then when I see that person at a meeting, because we had that just like harmless sort of day-to-day exchange, it just helps sort of warm the relationship a bit. So I found that to be a really I just happenstance ran into that, like that insight. I was never really like, let me think, how do I want to show up to this meeting? But I actually had to really take control of my calendar before I used to just blindly accept things, and then I'm like, well, who am I meeting? What are and then I just show up as me, and then just be unprepared. And later I had to be more like, I'm going to decline because I want to see who's in the audience. How do I want to show up? And one of my clients, and she was so masterful and she worked at a big, American Express, big companies, so, right? And she would literally, and she actually taught me something. She'd be like at a meeting, and she'd be like, okay, what kind of person am I going to be in this meeting? Am I going to be the agreeable person and sort of like prop someone else up, or am I going to be the dominant person and drive the agenda? So having sort of that plan of like, how are you going to show up to this? Even though at first when I heard her say that, I was like, oh my God, this seems so much work to like not just show up to the meeting prepared, but also deciding what kind of persona you want to take on. But then she said to me, she's like, Moon, but both sides are me. You know, I can be the agreeable listener, but I can also be the driver and dominant. And then once she said that, I'm like, oh, yeah, that's true. So you don't feel like you have to be someone else. I'm showing different shades of you, but you're being intentional in how you're showing up to a meeting. That was sort of an interesting aha for me.
Great question. And I think you have a question.
I do. I don't mind just shouting out because I don't have a microphone.
Hi, thank you for your time and all the insights you've shared. My name is Jasmine. I want to tap into a little bit on the motherhood because you all mentioned that you're a mother, and the topic of resilience and success, I don't think we can avoid talking about being a mother. We're also a businesswoman in a very demanding job. So do you mind sharing some of your moments of difficulty, how motherhood have shaped you, changed you, and even make you a better or worse even? So anything that insights.
Well, I'm happy to start. I think when I had my children in the early 2000s, think back like, where are we, 25 years ago? No cell phones, no remote working. Very different times. I remember walking into the office when I started to show my first bump. I'd walk around like this. I didn't tell anyone that I was pregnant until the inevitable, right? So times have changed, right? Let's put it like that. I think you have to be really careful about balancing your work, right? Whether it's looking after your children and prioritizing, because not every 2 days are going to be the same. So I think you need to understand where you are at work, what your demands are with your children, and also obviously managing the house as a wife or a carer. It's not easy. I don't think any one of us, look, we got through. There's a lot more available to us nowadays. Technology, resources are more accessible. I remember when I took a job, I used to have to, I said to my boss when I was taking a role as a controller, I'm going to need to leave at 6 because I need to go and pick my kids up from school. I didn't have anyone else to pick them up. And that wasn't even an issue because he had already seen that I was logging in at 10 o'clock at night to finish off my work before I even sort of explored an opportunity. So I think it's managing expectations. Be really open with your expectations and what your needs are, right? And it's no 2 days are the same. I wouldn't say it's a balance, it's an integration. And I think just use all the resources that are available to you now.
Yeah, I would say from my perspective, I fully outsourced to my ex-husband. He was a stay-at-home dad. And so
Lucky.
it is really hard to be, I'll say, like a partner at PwC with a demanding career where you're on the road Sunday through Thursday at a client and not have any sort of built-in support in this country. Hong Kong, different story. Everyone has stay-at-home help. So in this country, it is just like structurally not possible for two people to work without any sort of additional help. So I think that's important to just acknowledge. I will also say when I was choosing to leave the for-profit sector for the nonprofit sector, my tween-age children were a big driver of that and wanting to spend more time with them and not being at the beck and call of somebody saying like, oh, well, we're going to be wheels up to LA at 1 instead of 5 on Sunday, so there goes my son's baseball game. I was like, no, wait, I want to actually be at that game. I said that I was going to be at that game. He's the starting pitcher at that game. So making choices that are really intentional, and I do think it is you're never in balance, like not even one day. There are days where you feel like I've won the working mom lottery because the train comes on time and you make the play on time. Like for sure there are those moments, but they are probably fewer than the ones where you're like, I'm stuck in New Jersey Transit and I'm missing the play, right? And so it's just to not try for that like level of equilibrium because it's sort of elusive. And I think not saying I can't do it because I don't feel this sense of peace and equanimity in my working mother life. If you set that as the goal, I think it will be challenging. So just recognizing that it's super challenging and get support.
And actually, for me, it was actually Lord, my mom. She always says like, most people are leaving New York when they retire, going to Florida. We're the ones after retirement moving to New York. But I knew that it takes a village to raise children. So I knew that my mom had to be nearby, 15 minutes car drive nearby, and she needed to be very involved too. Yeah, her great grandma. I'm very appreciative of that. But also, like, just that also is hard because she's still like your mom and very critical. So I'm like, she comes yesterday and I knew my house was a mess. So I'm like vacuuming before she comes because I know she's gonna say something. So I'm like, I'm feeling pretty good. I'm like, the house is vacuumed. I look presentable. I made everyone's bed, or my husband always makes our bed, but I make the children's bed. I should have them make their own bed. But I'm like feeling pretty good. And then she comes and she's like still criticizing me. Like there's crumbs on the kitchen counter. I'm like, so, but she's helpful and I'm so happy she's here. But there's some things I still have to navigate just with my relationship.
So I was going to say that this week has been particularly rough. I'm shocked I don't have something on my jacket. My daughter is still little, so and I'm on the road every week in March. So if that tells you anything about my mental state right now, it's shocking that I've made it through this panel without mixing up my words. I was going to say there's a lot of science and study that shows. I'm going to get the details wrong, but something to the effect of working mothers, children, or the children who have working mothers do better, are more successful, and go further in life, paraphrasing. And the data shows that it's because they had a working mother. Not a working parent, but a working mother. So on days that it's tough, and there are many, and no 2 days are the same, no 2 days are perfect balance, I have to remind myself of things like that, because the details, like, every day, if you can't get worried about, I was 5 minutes late here, I forgot the soccer socks that match the soccer shoes, she should have packed her own. There's going to be little details, but if I think about the big picture, it sets my mind at ease that I'm doing the things that, for me, working and this career is really important and I want to do this. For her, there's actually a benefit to me doing what I think is important. So I think it's a win-win all around. You just have to remind yourself of those things. So it's very different now than it was 25 years ago, as you were saying. And we should take advantage of the things that have progressed. So do the research. There's lots of data. I'm happy to talk about it more. But I think keeping the big picture in mind makes the hard days easier.
I think we've sort of run out of time. I appreciate all the questions. And as we close, I do want to thank the panel, firstly, for sharing a lot of your experiences, and I hope you all took away something from that. And then thank you all for listening and devoting this time to celebrate yourselves. This is important. This is the start of the journey. This is now a community, so please take advantage of this community and pat yourselves on the back because you've made it. Thank you.